This experience I'm going to share with you was horrible in every way possible, and I need to get it off my chest. My name is Fernando Mendoza, and this story happened to me and my girlfriend 2 years ago. That afternoon, I picked her up at her apartment as we were going to travel to her hometown. It was my first time meeting her family, so I was a little nervous. She was a foreign student, so that was the reason I hadn't met them yet. But anyway, we hit the road at about 6 p.m. I really like to travel at night because there is less traffic and I feel more at ease for some reason. My girlfriend and I were having a good time, just talking about things. We had been traveling for about 3 hours when we decided to stop at a small restaurant on the side of the road. We hadn't eaten anything, so we got out and decided to have dinner there since it was uncomfortable to eat while driving. So that's what we did. It is worth mentioning that there were no people in that place, only 3 people attending the restaurant. The place was very quiet. We were there for about 40 minutes while we had dinner and used the bathroom. Then we went back to the car and started our trip again. We were driving on the dark road with no cars nearby, all very quiet, when suddenly we heard a cry from the back. It was like a woman's cry. My girlfriend and I turned to look. She immediately turned off the music to see if we could hear it again, and we did. Again, we clearly heard that cry of a woman. My girlfriend let out a cuss word out of shock and yelled at me to stop, so I did. I pulled off the road and turned off the car. My girlfriend got out immediately, looking back, very scared. I turned on my cell phone light and walked very slowly towards the trunk. When I got there, I opened it with fear, and there was the lifeless body of a woman wrapped in a clear plastic bag full of blood. I yelled at the top of my lungs. My girlfriend looked at me scared and asked me what was there, but I couldn't speak. She came over and saw it too. She ran to the bush to throw up and screamed at me. What the fuck? Who is she? How did she get there? I told her, baby, I swear, I have no idea. I'm going to call the cops. So I did. It took a long time for the police to arrive. My girlfriend and I were leaning, very scared in front of the car. She was crying and asking me how this was possible that it was happening to us. I didn't really know what to tell her, since I had no idea who had put that body in our trunk. At that moment, 2 patrol cars arrived and asked us to leave the car, as it was now part of a crime scene. They asked us questions and then took us to my town in a patrol car. We notified our relatives, who were very concerned. We spent that night at the police station. The next morning, we learned from a detective that the woman had been dead for more than 24 hours. We couldn't believe it, as we had heard her crying. That's how we realized that she was in the trunk. He kept telling us that was impossible. That made my girlfriend very scared and sad at the same time, because that woman, now deceased, wanted us to notice her. The detective also told us that someone had probably put that body in our car while we were having dinner at the restaurant. They were still investigating, as the place did not have cameras. We were let go after checking our routine for those days with camera evidence, just as they found no trace of us on the body. Not to mention that they had a print in the trunk that they couldn't identify. Sometime later, I got back my car, and the truth is, I never knew if they found the culprits of that terrible crime. But what I do know is that out there are very bad people to fear more than ghosts. Telling you this story means reliving the terror and trauma I experienced at that time, but it is worth telling people. And although perhaps some skeptical people will not believe what had happened to my husband and me, it was real, although I would have preferred it not to be. It was 2012. I remember because my husband and I were newlyweds. We left our new home that afternoon and hit the road as we were headed to a city where we used to live, as my sister-in-law had just given birth. I remember we were caught in the night, and back then, well, now too, but back then, things were more dangerous than ever. We were still 4 hours away from our destination, so my husband told me that he would prefer to get to some motel on the highway or a small town nearby to spend the night there and continue our trip in the morning. Although we already knew that we would be on the road at night, he later regretted it as he feared for my safety. I looked on the map on my cell phone to see if there was anything nearby where we could spend the night. And there, I saw a hotel with a restaurant where there was also a gas station next to it. According to the map, we were already very close, but a few minutes passed, and no matter how far we drove, we couldn't see anything. Suddenly, we saw a young woman walking along the side of the road, which seemed strange to us, but my husband said that maybe we were near a town and that's why she was on foot. I wasn't convinced because, as I said, the road was very dangerous at night. I thought it was strange to see a woman walking so casually around. My husband told me that he was going to pull over and ask her where the gas station with the motel I had seen on my cell phone was. I told him not to stop because I had a very bad feeling about it. Truth be told, I've always been fearful, but very intuitive at the same time. However, my husband didn't listen to me and pulled over anyway. He asked her if she knew where the motel was or any nearby town to spend the night. She pointed her finger across the street and said that when we got to the first dirt road, turn right, and that's where the place would be. I must say that I almost didn't turn around to see her, as I was a bit scared and nervous at the same time. My husband was the one who saw her the whole time and the one who talked to her. He said she had a lost look, but that he would still go to the place where she had pointed out to see if the place we were looking for was there. We advanced a few feet and suddenly there was that road. We could see street lights, but I couldn't see any gas stations, much less a motel. My husband went in anyways, and after a few feet, the only thing we could see was some kind of small abandoned warehouse. It was a small building in the middle of the woods, but for some strange reason, there were streetlights as if it was still in operation. My husband parked the car to look on his cell phone, as it was obvious that the woman had given us the wrong directions. I kept looking too, and according to the map, it was just up ahead. But there wasn't much of a signal, so we couldn't see exactly where it was. I just told my husband that we should get out of there. That motel shouldn't be too far away. But before I went any further, my husband said to me, "Just let me see what's in there. I'm curious why that girl sent us here." I told him he was fucking crazy to think of getting off. But as usual, he didn't listen to me and got off anyway. I saw him look into the big glass window of that building, and suddenly he just stood there without moving. I shouted at him to get back in the car, but he didn't answer me or turned around. He kept looking inside. Then he covered his mouth as if surprised, and I shouted at him, "Are you trying to scare me? Are you kidding? Stop it." He was already scaring me, but still, he didn't move. He didn't say anything to me. So I decided to get out too, to see what it was that had him so shocked. I should never have done it, because when I looked, I saw several lifeless bodies piled up, covered with blood. I screamed the loudest I have ever screamed in my entire life. I began to shake and pulled my husband, who was in shock at the sight. I got him to react as best as I could and got him back into the car. It took him several minutes to drive, but we finally got out of there. What I just told you was not the only thing that happened there. I am 99% sure that the body of one of the women in there was the body of that girl we met walking on the road, the one who sent us here. She was wearing the same white jacket and her hair was black and long, just like hers. Call me crazy, but I'm pretty sure of what I saw. That's why I couldn't believe it. We made the report to the authorities. We were very scared because it was obvious that this was an act of the organized crime that existed at that time. But we couldn't just leave those people there because we knew that their relatives were probably looking for them. I couldn't get it out of my mind that that girl sent us there to find her. As I said, it was a very traumatic and horrible experience, but I had to tell you about it. It kept me awake for many months, and now I can finally share it with you. Thank you. I never usually travel by road at night, and much less alone, because in my country, it is not very safe to do so. But on this occasion, it was out of necessity. And although nothing related to crime happened to me, something paranormal did happen to me that left me terrified and with nightmares to this day. My name is Jesus Herrera, and I want to share with you what happened to me on a highway in Mexico while I was traveling alone at night. That evening, I received a call that my mother had fallen ill. I lived in another city, 4 hours away for my work, so I didn't hesitate to leave as fast as I could to where my mother was. It was after 8 p.m. and already dark. Yes, I was a little nervous, but mostly because of the dangerous roads due to crime. I never imagined such a scary, out-of-this-world thing happening to me. I had been driving for about an hour and stopped at a gas station to buy coffee, as I didn't want to fall asleep on the way since I was so tired from work. As I was leaving the store, a man came out of nowhere and almost made me spill my coffee. He looked like a homeless man, and he was very poorly dressed and looked scruffy. Then I noticed his belongings and blankets in a corner of the store, and I realized that that's where he was staying. Suddenly, he said to me, "If you go that way, be very careful," pointing with his finger to where I was headed. He added, "If you see that child, don't stop. Don't look him in the eyes either. It's not a child. It's something evil that wants your soul." After saying that, he left. I, of course, paid no attention to him. I only felt sorry for that poor man because I assumed he was crazy. Not caring for a word he said, I got into my car and went on my way. I was already more than halfway there when I saw a little boy, very pale. His skin was very white, and he was standing on the side of the road, raising his little hand. I don't know if he was hitchhiking, but there he was. I immediately remembered what that man at the gas station had told me, but it seemed too strange. I was still in disbelief, and no, of course, I wasn't stupid enough to stop, but I did slow down because I was very curious to see him up close. But what was a child doing at that hour, alone, in the middle of such a dangerous road? As I approached, I noticed how pale he looked. I don't know if he thought I would stop to help him, but when he saw that I passed him without stopping, I could see his innocent face change completely. His eyes turned dark, and he took on an angry expression with a grim, challenging smile. A real terror to see that. I stepped on the gas as I remembered what the man had told me not to look him in the eye. As I drove away, I saw how that thing began to float, getting lost in the bushes. It didn't walk or run, it simply rose a little and moved in the direction of the darkness, losing itself completely in it. I drove on and until I reached the city, frightened and confused by the strange and evil being I had just seen. After all, that man was not so crazy. That man knew things. He knew who that thing in the shape of a child was. So, on my way back, I went out during the day and stopped by the gas station to see if I could find him. I wanted to ask him who this so-called child was. I was very curious, but I couldn't find him or his things that were there just around the corner of that store. I asked an employee of the gas station if they hadn't seen him or if they knew what time he came back to sleep. But the employee told me that he hadn't been there for several days and no one had seen him, which was strange because he slept there every night. The owner gave him the opportunity to stay there as long as he didn't bother anyone. When I heard that, I had a bad feeling. I just hope that man is okay and that he didn't fall into the hands of that thing pretending to be a child. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying these stories. My name is Norberto. This story happened to some friends and me a couple of years ago when we graduated from college. To celebrate, we decided to take a little trip to Puerto Vallarta. We were all from Guadalajara. That day, my friend Andres picked me up and then we went to pick up my other friends at their homes. In total, there were 5 of us. We got on the road around 7 o'clock in the evening since one of my friends was off work at that time. By 8 p.m., the road was completely dark. We were on the road, everything very normal, until a friend told us that there was a dirt road where we could save up at least an hour's drive. According to my friend, his dad had told him where it was and if we wanted to take it. I didn't really agree, as it seemed a bit risky considering that it was already dark. Although he swore that his dad had told him it was very safe and that he and his mom took it every time they traveled that road. My other friends agreed. They thought it would be fun to go through the woods at night. They wanted something paranormal to happen to us to record it, and just for that, they agreed. About 20 minutes passed and we arrived at the entrance of that road. My friend Andres turned and, in a second, we were already inside the dirt road between trees and the woods. The truth is that it was exciting, but at the same time, very creepy, because we could not see anything more than what the car lights could reach. We could hear animal sounds and also the typical sounds of the woods. A friend of mine in the back seat started to broadcast live, showing people on his social media where we were going. We were all laughing and relaxing when suddenly we ran out of signal. He couldn't stream anymore and we were cut off. We were getting deeper and deeper into the woods, in the middle of nowhere, where if we shouted, no one could hear us. I was already very nervous because I didn't like being vulnerable and disconnected like that. I've always been very cautious, and if it were up to me, I wouldn't have taken that road. But I was just too excited to be with my friends. They were still talking and laughing, but suddenly, everything took an unexpected turn. We saw how, in front of us, there was a little girl standing in the middle of the road. My friend stopped immediately as he almost ran her over. We all stood in silence, watching her, because we could not figure out what a little girl was doing there, alone, in the middle of nowhere, at night. It's creepy enough if it was a man, a woman, even something we didn't recognize. But the fact that it was a little girl in that place made it even more creepy. A friend said jokingly, "A typical roadside ghost little girl." We told him to shut up, that this was very serious. We had to think about what to do, whether to continue on our way or offer help to the girl, since she seemed real, flesh and blood. Andres lowered the window and asked her, "Are you okay, little girl?" But she did not respond. Suddenly we saw how some guys dressed in robes, like monks, began to come out of the trees around our car. None of us could see their eyes as the cloaks were covering them. We all got scared and urged Andres to step on the gas, but he told us that he couldn't, that the little girl was there and he wasn't going to run her over. I told him that it didn't matter because I knew that she was the trap so those guys could catch us. But Andres didn't want to. The guys were getting closer and closer to our cars. They all wore a big necklace like an inverted cross. They wore sandals and walked very slowly. A friend of mine who was in the back of the car started cussing them out and told them to leave us alone. But these guys didn't say anything. They just kept coming closer and closer. I, in desperation, stepped on the gas since Andres was not reacting, but that made Andres lose control of the steering wheel and we crashed into a tree. It was nothing serious and nobody was hurt. But now, what worried us most was that the car wouldn't start. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we heard a loud bang. Something had fallen from the tree on top of the car. When Andres was finally able to start the car and backed it up, a lifeless body fell from the roof. He had no clothes on and had cuts all over him. My friends and I started screaming in panic, but when we looked up, there, in that tree, were more than 10 bodies hanging, all without clothes and all with cuts. The scene was horrific, something etched in my memory. Andres sped up as fast as he could, and little by little, we moved away from those guys who were only watching us all the time. The reason they didn't chase us at that moment was because further down the road, we could see how there were spikes all over the ground. They were traps to puncture the tires of the cars so they could kidnap people. But we were smarter than them because we realized before we stepped on those spikes, thanks to the high beams, and we got off the road, going around until we reached the road again. When we got out of there, we were all in a state of shock. As soon as I could, I called my parents as the signal came back and told them what had happened to us. They told me not to turn back as we were already far away. They told me to go to the first city and stay in a hotel while they called the police. But that was in vain because the police never found anything at that place. Not even the bodies we had seen in that tree. It was as if nothing had been real. Although we all know what we saw, and it was the scariest thing that ever happened to me, we don't know to this day who those people were. We assume it was a cult that sacrificed people for rituals. We don't know what a little girl was doing with them, helping them. That was the most disturbing part. To this day, I have not traveled at night again, and I don't think I ever will because the trauma is still there. Some years ago, when I was younger, I must have been about 14 years old. I would go with my grandfather to Durango because I liked to spend summer vacations with him on his big ranch. He would always pick me up at my house where I lived with my mother and little sister. I remember that we always traveled at night, as he would go and return on the same day. He never wanted to spend the night. He always wanted us to leave the same day. He said he didn't want to leave his ranch and his animals alone for a long time. That night we talked as we always did. He told me stories that had happened to him when he was young, and I was very entertained listening to him. We were driving in the darkness of that road, surrounded by the woods. Everything was peaceful and awesome at the same time, until something strange and unexpected happened. My grandfather suddenly slammed on the brakes, and if we hadn't been wearing our seatbelts, I don't know what would have happened. When I turned to the front, I saw a man standing about 2 feet away from my grandfather's car. He was in the middle of the road. He was an older man with a black cloak on his head, who was looking at us without any expression on his face. My grandfather, very angry, shouted at him, "What the fuck are you doing there? I almost ran you over." But the man didn't answer. He just kept watching us. My grandfather, more and more annoyed, began to shout at him. The road was very narrow and he couldn't get around him without hitting him. He yelled at him again, very angry, to move and cussed him out. I was very frightened, as the situation was very strange and there were no cars behind us. We were completely alone. But that would be nothing compared to what happened next. When my grandfather cussed at him, suddenly the man started to smile. And we could see how 2 cows, which were in the bush a few feet away from us, started walking on 2 legs towards us. Only their eyes were shining, while the man kept smiling, as if he was enjoying our fear and shock. I yelled at my grandfather to speed up. He backed up and pulled off the road so he could avoid the man and get us out of there. As we were driving away, I kept looking back, but the man was still standing there. He turned around to keep looking at us, as those animals were lost in the darkness. I was very scared. My grandfather didn't know how to explain to me what had just happened, because he himself didn't know. He just told me. That was not good at all. When animals walk on 2 legs, it is because the devil is very close. Although it's been a long time since that happened, I'm still terrified when I remember it. I never saw that mysterious man on the road again, nor my grandfather. I was only left with that horrible experience, which to this day still causes me nightmares. This happened to my brother-in-law and I several years ago when we were going to my family's ranch to celebrate his bachelor party. We decided to leave one night early to help get everything ready for the party the next day. We had a house there, so that's where we stayed. Leaving work, I picked them up and we hit the road around 8 p.m. The ranch was about 2 hours from the city. It was about 9:30 when we got to the dirt road to enter the ranch, and from there, it was only half an hour to get there. But we ran into a closed road, as there was a risk from criminal gangs at that time. Not knowing what to do, I remembered that further ahead, there was another road that would take much longer to reach the ranch and was much uglier, since there were many rocks and we would have to drive very slow. We had no choice, so we took it. We arrived at the road and I drove in slowly when, out of nowhere, a man came out with the wheelbarrow on the road. He signaled us to stop. I stopped and rolled down the window to see what he needed, and all he said to us was, "Young man, good evening. I suggest you get back on the road. You shouldn't be driving around here, especially at this hour. There are spirits that will make you lose control of your car and you could have a fatal accident." My brother-in-law let out a little laugh. I made a face like telling him to shut up, and the man just told us, "If you don't believe me, it's okay. I've done my job warning you. I hope you arrive safely to your destination." After that, the man left. My brother-in-law, as a joke, said to me, "What the fuck has that man been smoking?" Followed by a laughter. I didn't laugh because something in me made me wonder. It made me, for a second, believe the man who told us so seriously and in a very respectful way. But I didn't pay attention to my intuition because the only thing I wanted was to get to the ranch to rest. So I continued driving along that road. We were very close to the ranch when we were passing a bridge where, below, there was a stream. Suddenly, something moved the steering wheel. I don't even know how to explain it, but the steering wheel moved and I lost total control of the car. As much as I tried to straighten it out, I couldn't. It was as if someone with a lot of strength had moved it. We managed to get out of the bridge, but we crashed into a tree. We didn't get anything more than scrapes, but the whole front of my car was pinned. It was too big a scare. We immediately got out of the car and asked each other if we were okay. Apparently, it was just a scare and material damage. Nothing serious happened to us because I was going at a slow speed, but if I had been going fast, it could have been worse. We called the emergency services and our families, who came to help us. But what I found most difficult was how to explain what had happened to us, because no one would believe me that something had moved the steering wheel to make me lose control. Not even my brother-in-law, who had thought it was funny what that man had warned us about. So I didn't tell anyone what really happened. Only my brother-in-law, who, after living it, was beginning to believe. A few weeks went by and we had the bachelor party again in the same place. But now, my father was driving and we went through the original road, which was blocked that night. While we were at the party, my father invited some friends of his who lived near the ranch. Suddenly, one of the men approached me and, without introducing himself or anything else, said to me, "They moved your steering wheel at the creek, didn't they?" It has happened to several people I know. That's why I ask. I was very shocked. I said yes and told him how it all happened. He told me the following. He said that almost a year ago, a criminal group in a pickup truck had an accident there on that bridge. They fell into the creek and they all died. They were going very fast because they were being chased, and since that time, this paranormal event began to happen to several people. They all said the same thing, that suddenly the steering wheel had moved by itself, and those who lived to tell the tale could not control it. I was very shocked and began to believe everything because I lived it in my own flesh. It was a before and after in my life, because before that, I was very skeptical. I didn't believe in anything paranormal, but now, of course, I know that these things happen. Now, they have knocked down the bridge. No vehicle can pass over it anymore after so many accidents that happened there. This was, without a doubt, an incredible and terrifying experience. This happened to my family and me when we were traveling in our car from Ciudad Madero to San Luis Potosí. That day, my parents, my sister, and I were in the car. I was in the front with my father since he still doesn't know how to use GPS very well. I was helping him by telling him where to go. Night fell, and we were driving on somewhat dangerous roads up in the mountains. I was very careful watching the road when, suddenly, in the distance, I saw what looked like a person walking along the side of the road close to the mountain. I could make it out very well because it was dressed in white and I could see that it was moving. My mother, very impressed, asked us, "Is that a woman? How dangerous for her to be walking around here at this hour?" I answered that it looked like one. The closer we got, the more we saw how she raised her hand as if asking for a ride. What seemed strange to us was that there was no other car passing by. We didn't know who she was asking for a ride, since we were still far away from her. My mother told my dad to pull over when we got to her side, because maybe she needed help and we couldn't leave her alone. At that, my sister said, "Mom, no. How are you going to put a stranger in our car on this road?" But my parents scolded her, asking her if she would like to be in that situation and no one to help her. Anyway, when we finally approached the woman, my father pulled over and put on his flashing lights. The woman was standing with her back to the car. She looked very strange though. Her hair was black, but it looked more like a wig. And the woman was no longer moving. She was just standing there, looking up at the mountain. My mother rolled down the window and shouted to her, "Hello, do you need help?" But the woman didn't answer and didn't turn to look at us. They shouted at her again, but she was completely still, as if she were a statue or something. My father pulled the car forward, and we finally got a good look at her. That wasn't a woman. It was a very creepy looking mannequin. She had a white face, very pale, piercing eyes, and a very big smile. She was dressed in a white gown, and her feet were non-existent. She was standing on a base, which was what kept her standing. My sister screamed and told my father to step on the gas. My mother was speechless, and I was also shocked, since absolutely all of us had seen her walk and raise her hand asking for a ride. She even turned her head, looking out at the road. It was unbelievable. My father sped up immediately, and we were watching her in the mirror, but out of nowhere, she disappeared. My father started laughing nervously, asking us if we had seen it too. We were all very shocked and scared at the same time because we didn't know what it was or what it was doing there in the middle of the road or why it could move. It is a story that we still tell in my family. Many don't believe us, obviously, and others are as shocked as we were. There is no doubt that many strange things can happen on the roads at night. That afternoon, we were on the road, my family and me. We were heading home after a long vacation in December. My father was driving, and my mother was in the passenger seat. I was riding with my little sister, just 3 years old, in the back seats. I remember it was getting dark, very cold, and as if that wasn't enough, it started to rain. My father started to drive slower as the rain barely let us see in the dark road. So we were driving very cautiously. Suddenly, my little sister, who could already speak, although sometimes she couldn't be understood well, said to me excitedly and smiling while pointing her little finger towards the mountain, "Look!" I asked her what she was looking at, and she answered, "My tito." That's my tito. That's what she called our grandfather. She said it so loud and so excited that my mom heard it and turned around immediately. But there was nothing there. In fact, you could barely see in the rain and the darkness. My mother asked her, "What's wrong with your tito?" And my little sister answered, "There he is. He's following us. He is out there." My mother didn't think anything of it and just said, "Okay," just to play along. My little sister simply said, "Bye, Tito." She waved her little hand as if she was really saying goodbye and then sat quietly. She didn't say anything else. When we finally arrived home, my aunt, my mom's sister, and her husband were waiting for us. It was then that they gave us the terrible news that hurts me to this day. My grandfather had passed away that morning. They had not wanted to tell us anything before, so as not to worry us and to prevent us from having an accident on the road. They preferred to wait until we were home to give us the news. So what my sister saw, yes, it was our grandfather. Maybe he just wanted to say goodbye to us, but only my little sister could see him. They say children don't lie, and that thought comforts me. I am left with the memory of knowing that he loved us until his last breath, and that he somehow came to say goodbye to us. My name is Rodrigo Salazar, and for a long time I have wanted to share this story that happened to my wife, my teenage son, and me about a year ago. We were traveling through the highways of Tamaulipas on our way to my niece's wedding. We were running a little late as those roads are full of curves and I had to drive very carefully. Everything was going normal. My wife and I were chatting while my son was in the back seat entertained with his phone. Suddenly, we entered a wide stretch of road surrounded by mountains. By day, this place is beautiful, but at night, you can only see the dark silhouettes of towering mountains and a winding road full of curves. Out of nowhere, my wife said, "I saw something up there, something very big flying over the mountain." I tried to look up, but I couldn't take my eyes off the road because it was too dangerous. My son, hearing his mother, stuck his head out the window to look, and the first thing he shouted, "What is that?" My wife kept looking at the sky and, with a trembling voice, began to pray the Lord's Prayer. I barely, out of the corner of my eye, managed to notice something. The silhouette of what looked like a very large person flying between the mountains. My son began to record it with his phone, but in the video you can't see anything because of the distance and the darkness. Suddenly, my wife said to him, upset, "Close the window." My son obeyed, but kept looking out, trying to figure out what it was. It was clear that it was not a bird, and that insecurity was getting on our nerves. My wife continued praying with her eyes closed, and suddenly, the figure disappeared into the mountains. Before disappearing, however, it left behind it a bright red light that lasted for a few seconds before it was gone. We were stunned. All three of us were frightened, although my son, instead of fear, seemed excited to tell the story to his cousins and friends. My wife, on the other hand, was very upset. She remained serious the rest of the way. Once at my niece's house, she confessed to me that was not good at all. It was something evil. It could have hurt us. She, being a native of that region, knew many stories that people told. I had never seen anything like it, neither as a child nor as an adult, until that day. She recommended to me to pray without stopping, to keep whatever it was away from us. On the way back, we traveled by day, and fortunately, we did not see anything again. However, that experience was etched in our memories forever. My advice, if you ever see something like that, it's simple. Pray hard. Don't let that kind of thing come near you or hurt you. Have a great night. Today, I am going to tell you about a strange and disturbing event that I experienced with my sister while we were returning home after a vacation. It all happened on the Querétaro highway on a cold and rainy night. It was past midnight and the rain was so heavy that I could barely see the road. I was driving slowly to avoid any accidents, while my sister was recording stories for her social media. She was narrating the spooky weather when suddenly she said something that, to this day, makes my hair stand on end. Now all we need is for a ghost to appear on the road to complete the scene. As if with those words, she had attracted it. A few seconds later, she pointed in front of me, saying, "Toño, there's something standing there." I thought she was just saying that to make her video more interesting, but when I focused my eyes, I saw that she was right. In the middle of the rain and darkness, a woman in light clothing was hitchhiking. Her figure stood out in the gloom. My sister, nervous but determined, asked me to stop and help her. "You're crazy," I told her. "I'm not going to stop at this hour, especially not in these conditions." But she insisted. "What if it were you standing there? Wouldn't you want someone to help you?" I had no choice. I pulled over and the woman came over. She was soaking wet, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. My sister rolled down the window and asked her if she needed help. The woman, with a serious tone, replied that her car had gone off the road and that she wanted to get to Mexico City. Without asking me, my sister offered her a ride, and in the blink of an eye, she was sitting in the back seat. The strange thing was that although she said her car was nearby, there was no sign of any vehicle in that area. The woman didn't talk much. My sister tried to make small talk and even offered her her phone to call someone, but she refused. About 20 minutes later, a truck on the wrong side of the road forced us to swerve, almost causing an accident. My sister, frightened, reached down to pick up her phone, which she had dropped. I turned to the back seat to ask the woman if she was okay, but she was no longer there. "Vero, the woman is gone," I yelled at her. My sister, alarmed, sat up and turned to the back. The seat was empty. We were both terrified. How could she have disappeared without us noticing? Then I remembered that my sister had been recording everything since we saw the woman. I asked her to review the video. With hands shaking, she fast-forwarded the recording to the moment we stopped to talk to the woman, but on the video, no one was there. Not the figure on the road, not her voice, not even the moment she got into the car. It looked like my sister was talking to herself. When we got home, we told our parents everything. We showed them the video, but since there was no evidence, we noticed that they didn't quite believe us. Still, my sister and I know what we saw and experienced that night. To this day, we still wonder, was it a lost soul doomed to repeat that moment? Or was it something darker? And you, would you stop to help in a situation like this? Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying these stories. What I'm about to tell you didn't happen to me. It happened to my brother and his two friends. But my brother gave me permission to tell his terrible story, simply to raise awareness. This happened 2 years ago. The wounds are healing little by little. That's why I can tell you this story. My brother at that time went on a trip with two of his best friends. They were going to a concert of his favorite band to a city that was 3 hours away from where we lived. They left around 6 p.m. that evening. Since the concert was until 10 p.m., they had plenty of time, and since they had VIP tickets, they didn't worry about waiting in line. My brother told us that little after the halfway point, they stopped at a store where there were also restrooms, since everyone wanted to get there to use the bathroom and buy some snacks. He says that outside that little store, a few feet away, there was a cross with beautiful floral arrangements, as if they had just been placed there. One of his friends, whom we'll just call Victor, went over there while my brother and his other friend were in the bathroom. When they came out, they saw that Victor was walking towards the car with a beautiful flower arrangement that he had taken from that cross. My brother and the other boy shouted at him, asking what he was doing, that he should put it back because it didn't belong to him. But Victor stupidly came back laughing, saying that it was nothing, that there was no one who could see him, that he would give the flowers to the lead singer of the band, who was his crush. my brother insisted that he should put it back, that he shouldn't steal, that it was not right to do that, that if he wanted to, they could go to a flower shop in the city so he could buy flowers for the singer. But Victor didn't want to, and they couldn't take the arrangement from him or convince him to put it back. At that moment, the owner of the store came out to see who was arguing outside, and because of that, my brother's other friend sped up so that she would not see that Victor had stolen those flowers. They were arguing on the road. They were arguing with Victor for what he had done. But suddenly, out of nowhere, the car overturned. My brother says he saw something standing in the middle of the road before it overturned, but he couldn't see who or what it was. Victor lost his life. My brother and his other friend were almost unharmed and could not believe what was happening. After help arrived, they were taken to the hospital in the city where they were going to the concert. My parents went to pick up my brother, who was in the hospital in that city. My brother says that when they were coming back home, they passed by the same store where that cross with the flowers were, and he could see the same arrangement that his friend had stolen. My brother was very shocked and knew that it could not be a coincidence, since the only one who had lost his life in that accident had been Victor. He told us this after weeks because he didn't know if we were going to believe him, nor did he want to burn his friend, since he had already died. But he told us that he could not take it anymore, that he had to talk about it with someone, because he was sure that whoever was the deceased to whom the cross with flowers had been put had taken revenge on his friend for stealing from him, and for that reason had caused that accident. We supported my brother a lot to help him overcome that tragic event, but we could never find an explanation for it all. That is why we have to be respectful with the deceased. Let us not underestimate them, and let us not take things that do not belong to us, even if the owners are no longer on this planet. This is a delicate subject, but I feel the need to share with you this story that happened to my husband and I not too long ago. Although it is, I would say, a paranormal story, it is a sad and horrible reality in which we live. I will omit our names as I wish to share this anonymously, and I will not give names of places either. That day, my husband and I went out on the road. It was a summer vacation and we had planned a trip touring Pueblos Mágicos in our car. I was very excited because I was looking forward to seeing all those beautiful places, and besides, we needed a vacation after so much work. Sadly though, our happy plan was affected by what happened to us. We spent most of the day in a magical town, but a lady we met in a local restaurant, talking with her, recommended us to visit another small town that was very close to there, about an hour away. She told us that it was much smaller, but that it was not to be missed because it was very beautiful and colorful, although it was not well known by tourists. My husband asked her for directions on how to get there, and she recommended taking a shortcut that would make it much shorter than if we took the highway. We drove off in our car to the little town that the lady had recommended. I was very excited about the next adventure, although we had to hurry because the sun was already setting and I wanted to enjoy the colors of that little town during the day. But it wasn't like that. We were going along that somewhat hidden path, the one the lady had recommended to us. There was not a single building around, and since we entered there, we never saw another vehicle. I didn't notice at first because of the excitement, but after a while, my husband pointed it out. He asked me, "Don't you think it's strange that in all the time we've been on this road, not a single vehicle has been through here?" To which I replied that yes, I hadn't noticed it until he mentioned it to me. But maybe it was because the tourists didn't know about this shortcut and that Besides, the village was not well known by tourists either. But the strange thing was that not even the locals were passing by. The sun was already setting. It was almost dark, and I started to get scared and a weird vibe. I wanted to get to the village. I no longer felt excited, but anxious and very nervous to be there, alone, and for it to get completely dark. Here comes the ugliest part of this story, and what still shocks me after so long. Out of nowhere, we didn't know at what moment or from where a girl came out running on that road right in front of us. She looked badly dressed, with her clothes torn and very messy. In her face, I noticed that she was crying, very scared. My husband immediately stopped when he saw her. We were both looking at her stunned, unable to say anything. And here comes the most terrifying and strange part of all this. In the blink of an eye, the girl was gone. It was as if she had vanished. Neither my husband nor I could see exactly where she went or the exact moment she disappeared. There was no one else there, no cars or people. We were the only ones in that place, which by this time was completely dark. We turned everywhere, but the girl was nowhere to be seen. She simply disappeared in the blink of an eye. I've always been a very nervous and fearful person, so I started to tremble with fear and wanted to cry. I could hardly speak, just trying to ask my husband in a broken voice what had happened. He held my hand and told me, "Calm down, honey. It's over. We're leaving now." But I could see the confusion and fear on his face. I told him to go back, to get out of there immediately, to return to the road. So that's what he did. And the road took forever. We arrived at the next magical town that we had already scheduled, where we had already booked our hotel room. I didn't even want to go out. I just wanted to stay in bed because I was still very shocked and scared by what had happened. The next day, my husband convinced me to go out and visit. That was the only way to get over the shock. We spent the whole day walking around that town, and as fate would have it, we met a couple who started talking to us in a bar. At that moment, my husband brought up the subject of what had happened to us the night before. They were locals, so they asked us exactly what stretch of road it happened on, and my husband told them. They turned to look at us with an agitated face, and the man, very serious, told us, "I don't know who told you to go that way, but please don't ever go that way again. It is a very delicate subject, but we will tell you so that you can be very careful." And this is where the two of them began to explain to us that this road was a hidden route where illegal trucks passed by with girls on board. I know I can't be explicit, but you will understand me. Of course, girls who were deprived of their freedom for profit. We were left with our mouths open when we heard that and the danger we were exposed to. But there was still the doubt of that girl who asked for help and disappeared in less than a second, to which they told us that maybe she was one of those girls who had lost her life trying to escape, and it was simply her spirit. That was too much for me. It was very scary, but more than that, it was very sad. My husband and I know that what we saw was real, and after knowing all that, her appearance made some sense to us. Although we were never big believers in such things, as they say, you don't believe it until it happens to you. And sadly, we had lived it. I only hope that poor girl finds the light and peace she is looking for. That was the last time I decided to travel at night, because after that, I am paranoid that I am always being followed. My name is Monica, and today I want to share with you this story from when I was younger. This happened to two friends and me on the Sonora-Sinaloa highway. You see, My friends and I were in college and decided to take a weekend trip to the beaches of Mazatlan. We planned to leave early in the morning, but we had a lot of setbacks. On top of that, we had a flat tire on the highway and I had to buy a new one since I didn't have a spare. So we ended up leaving much later than planned. I was driving and I've always been nervous about driving the highway at night, but we had to get there that day as the hotel room was already booked for that night. So we got on our way. Everything was going great. We were listening to music and talking, but halfway there, we all wanted to go to the bathroom and also buy something to eat. We were looking for a gas station or a store on the side of the road to stop. About half an hour passed when we finally saw a roadside store. I immediately turned around and parked outside. We all got out of the car, went to the bathroom, and bought food for the road. It was already about 8 o'clock at night, so it was completely dark. The night had caught up to us. We left the place and got into the car. There was very little street lighting in that place, so you couldn't see anything. I started the car and backed out of the parking lot, but at that moment I felt I hit something. It was a small bump, but it scared us. When I got out of the car, I saw that it was a car that had parked badly. It was only a foot away from mine. I didn't really want to stay to find out who the owner was. My friends told me to leave before he came out, since I hadn't caused any damage to the car. I listened to them and we left immediately. We were already leaving that place when suddenly we saw the same car behind us. It was following us. I panicked immediately as I thought that the person had realized that I had hit his car and wanted me to pay or something. I thought about stopping to settle things, but one of my friends said, "No, don't even think about it, as it could be very dangerous." We didn't know who was in the car or what their intentions were. We were 4 women in the middle of the road at night. Everything was set up for something bad to happen. I decided to keep driving and didn't pull over, but the car got closer and closer until suddenly I felt it hit us from behind. It was a very hard hit, so hard that one of my friends almost flew out to the front seat because she wasn't wearing her seatbelt. I was very angry, scared, and confused at the same time. I didn't know whether to stop or keep driving, but something in me knew that the person driving the car was not good and wanted to hurt us. I tried to drive faster, but I was afraid to speed up. The car was coming within inches of mine. My friend, who was in the passenger seat, leaned out of the window and shouted angrily, "What the fuck is your problem? We are going to call the cops." But that was a lie because neither of us had a cell phone signal. Besides, back then, cell phones were very different from today. There were no social media or anything like that. We were desperate. We wanted to get to a small town or gas station, any place where there were people and streetlights to ask for help. But everything was deserted. We could not see anything nearby, only the road. I was still driving when suddenly that car hit me again. This time, my car couldn't take it anymore, and I lost control until we went off the road. Thank God, nothing happened to any of my friends or me, but the terror was just beginning. I told them to lock all the doors because that car had just stopped behind us and my car wouldn't start. I can't explain to you the fear I felt of being there, completely vulnerable and alone in the middle of nowhere with a damn madman who had ran us off the road. We were waiting for someone to get out of the car, and they did. Suddenly, we saw someone open the driver's side door. To our surprise, an armed woman came out, dressed as military. It was a woman around 40 years old. She was slowly approaching our car, pointing her gun at us. My friend started to cry, and I didn't know what to do or say. The woman stood next to me and tapped on the window with her gun. I didn't want to roll it down, but she threatened me, and my friends yelled at me to roll it down. So I did. The lady, laughing, in an unhinged manner, shouted at me, "Get out of the car." I got out with my legs and my whole body shaking with fear. As I did, I apologized for hitting her car, that I didn't see it, and that it had been unintentional. But she shut me up instantly. She said her baby was in her car, and because of me, she had started crying. I apologized again and told her that I had no idea there was a baby in there. I repeated that it was an accident, but at that moment, the woman hit me with her gun. I fell to the floor while my friends started screaming. Then I saw how the woman went to them, pulled them down one by their hairs, and threw them to the floor next to me. She forced us to our knees. At that instant, I knew it was over. I felt we were going to die one by one. We were all crying and begging her to let us go. I repeat, I cannot explain to you the terror you feel at a moment like that. It is like a living dream, or rather, a nightmare. The woman began to insult us and call us all kinds of rude names, saying that we were going to die. We were all still paralyzed with terror. Suddenly, the woman looked back at her car and, with an expression of fury that I cannot describe, said, "You made my baby cry again." We were all confused as no crying could be heard. Despite that, the woman ran to her car and returned carrying something in her arms. When she approached and stood in front of us, we saw that it was a doll. She was carrying it wrapped in a baby blanket, cuddling it and kissing it as if it were real. "Calm down, love. Mommy will defend you," she said as she rocked her up and down. We knew at that moment that the woman was completely crazy and out of her mind. We felt lost. How could we reason with a crazy fucking woman? One of my friends, in a stupid act, thought to tease her and say, "That's a doll." The woman turned to look at her with extreme fury. She pointed the gun at her, and we all closed our eyes, terrified, not wanting to see what was going to happen. The woman pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. It was a miracle. At that instant, another of my friends reacted and bravely rushed her, knocking her to the ground. The woman began to scream in despair that we had hurt her baby. At that moment, I ran to my car and I tried to start it. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking as I turned the key over and over. Finally, the car started. My friends ran to the vehicle and quickly climbed in. I sped off, leaving the woman behind, crying and screaming in the dark. We drove on for what seemed like hours until we finally saw the lights of a gas station and a restaurant. It was like an oasis in the middle of the desert. We stopped there and ran to the cashier, asking her to call the police. We couldn't stop crying. We were in shock and could barely speak. When the police arrived, they escorted us back home as we no longer felt like continuing our journey. Later, the authorities informed us that they had found the woman in the woods, still holding the doll in her arms. We discovered that she was an ex-military woman diagnosed with schizophrenia who had been confined in a psychiatric hospital from which she had escaped a year before. We were also told that she had had a baby who died a few months after birth, which aggravated her mental illness. That evening, that event marked us forever. Since that day, I no longer travel at night, and if I do, it is only with my husband and always during the day. I cannot forget the terror I felt and how, for a moment, I thought it would be the end for us. This experience taught me to never underestimate the risks of traveling at night and to value life, because in a matter of seconds, everything can change.